China is furious. Protests erupt, flags burn, and military ships circle the ocean. But what caused all this chaos? Just a few empty rocks in the sea. The Senkaku Islands, controlled by Japan, but claimed by China, are uninhabited and tiny, barely enough space for a lighthouse. Yet for decades, they've sparked heated arguments, international tensions, and even threats of war. China says they've always been theirs. Japan says they legally annexed them in 1895. And the United States? They support Japan's defense, but refuse to say who really owns them. It's a geopolitical standoff with history, pride, and power at its core. But the real mystery is why now? Why this place? Why is China so emotionally invested in rocks that no one lives on? In this video, we'll break down the full story calmly, clearly, and from both sides. Let's begin with the basics. What exactly are the Senkaku Islands? And why do they matter? Section 1. What are the Senkaku Islands? And why should you care? What if I told you wars almost started over uninhabited rocks? Sounds ridiculous, right? But that's exactly what's been happening in East Asia. At the heart of this tension lies a group of tiny islands. They're called the Senkaku Islands in Japan, and the Jiaoyu Islands in China. They have no people, no buildings, no real infrastructure, just a few rugged, windy rocks in the East China Sea. So why are two of Asia's most powerful nations fighting over them? Why does China organize protests over these islands? Why does Japan send Coast Guard ships every single day? Why does the U.S. say, we support Japan, but still avoid taking sides? To understand all this, we need to start simple. We need to know, what are these islands? Where are they? And who claimed them first? The Senkaku Islands are made up of 5 small islands and 3 rocky outcrops. They're located roughly 170 kilometers northeast of Taiwan and 410 kilometers west of Okinawa. Since the 1970s, they've become one of the most sensitive flashpoints in Asia. Fishermen have been harassed, nationalists have landed on them, military planes and ships have played a dangerous game of chicken above the sea. But wait. Before we dive into history, let me ask you this. Have you ever seen your country get emotional over a place you've never been to? Over land no one lives on? Maybe this isn't really about land. Maybe it's about something else. Section 2. The Forgotten History. Japan's quiet claim since 1895. Let's go back to a time before oil, before radar, before airplanes or even cars. The year is 1895. Japan had just won a war against China, known as the First Sino-Japanese War. But something else happened that year quietly. Without blood, without protest, Japan surveyed a group of uninhabited islands in the East China Sea and officially incorporated them into Okinawa Prefecture. No one objected. Not China, not Taiwan, not any international power. Why? Because the islands were empty. No buildings. No people, just seabirds and sharp rocks. Japan said they found no evidence of Chinese control. They checked maps, old records, even sailed around them. Everything pointed to one conclusion. These islands were unclaimed. In international law, that matters. If no country controls a land, and you occupy it peacefully, it becomes yours. It's called terra nullius, land belonging to no one. So Japan submitted paperwork, passed cabinet approval, built a fish processing plant, and treated the islands like any other part of Okinawa. And for decades, nobody said a word. China didn't protest, not in the 1920s, not in the 1940s, not even after World War II. So the question is, if China truly believed these islands were theirs, why did they say nothing for over 70 years? Section 3. China's sudden outrage. What changed in the 1970s? For over 70 years, China said nothing. Not a word. No protests. No official statements. No maps showing ownership. But then, something changed. In the early 1970s, a new report shocked the region. A United Nations study suggested that large oil and gas reserves might lie beneath the East China Sea, right around the Senkaku Islands. Suddenly, everything changed. Beijing began claiming the islands as historically Chinese. Old maps were re-examined. New documents appeared, and loud protests started both on the streets and in diplomatic halls. But why now? Why didn't China raise its voice in the 1950s or the 1960s? The truth is, during those years, China had bigger problems. A revolution, famine, and internal power struggles. They had neither the time nor the international strength to focus on small islands. But after oil was discovered, interest surged. Suddenly, these empty rocks weren't just rocks. They became strategic territory. They became evidence of sovereignty. They became emotional. Ask yourself this: if the oil wasn't there, would China have cared? Would anyone? Of course, governments won't admit that. They say it's about history, about pride. But timing tells another story. And that timing began with the scent of oil. Section 4 maps, lies, and old claims. Who's telling the truth? Both Japan and China say the same thing. This land has always been ours. And both sides claim to have proof. China shows old maps, ancient records, and historical names. Japan shows surveys, cabinet decisions, and international law. But here's where it gets complicated. Much of China's so-called evidence appeared only after the 1970s. Old maps were suddenly discovered. Documents were reinterpreted. And historical claims became emotional weapons. Let's look closer. Some Chinese maps from the early 20th century don't even include the islands. Others label them without clear borders. In some versions, even Taiwan is shown as separate from China. Japan, on the other hand, documented its claim in 1895. It registered the islands, mapped them, and submitted them to international authorities. So who's telling the truth? That's not easy to answer. Because maps can be edited, documents can be reprinted, and history, when used by governments, is rarely neutral. But ask yourself this: if your country truly owned something, would you forget about it for 70 years? Would your maps ignore it? Would your leaders say nothing? This isn't just about documents. It's about credibility and consistency. Anyone can wave a map, but timing matters, and so does silence. Section 5: How Japan controls the islands without saying much. Japan doesn't shout. It doesn't wave flags in protest. It doesn't rally crowds or burn anything. Instead, it patrols, it monitors, and it documents. Every single day, Japanese Coast Guard ships move around the Senkaku Islands. They record foreign vessels. They mark territorial breaches. They report everything quietly, but thoroughly. There are no headlines, no fiery speeches, no public rage, and yet Japan holds control. There are no Chinese buildings on the islands, no Chinese Coast Guard stationed there, no permanent Chinese presence of any kind. But Japan? They've built weather stations, lighthouses, buoys. They have maintained the islands as part of Okinawa for decades. This strategy is called tacit control. Not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. In international law, it's not about who talks the most. It's about who actually does something, who maintains presence, who takes responsibility. And Japan has done that, year after year. Ask yourself this: which country looks more confident, the one shouting, or the one quietly holding its ground? Which feels more secure? Maybe power doesn't always scream. Maybe sometimes it just watches and waits. Section 6: China's protests, boycotts, and rage more than just rocks. Flags burn in the streets. Crowds shout anti-Japan slogans. Shops ban Japanese goods. Cars with Japanese license plates are attacked. All over a few empty islands? In 2012, when Japan nationalized the Senkaku Islands, massive protests exploded across China. Some turned violent. Japanese factories were vandalized. Embassies were surrounded. And media coverage fanned the flames. It wasn't just about territory. It felt personal. But here's what's interesting. Japan didn't respond with counter-protests. No Japanese mobs shouted back. No boycotts. No rage. So here's the question. Why does China react so emotionally while Japan stays silent? Is it political? Is it cultural? In Chinese education, patriotism is emphasized early. The idea of national humiliation is taught again and again. And when territorial pride is challenged, emotions rise fast. In Japan, emotional restraint is seen as strength. Calmness is respected. Shouting is frowned upon. So ask yourself, when you see these two reactions, which one do you understand more? Which feels more familiar to your own country? Maybe this isn't just a dispute between two governments. Maybe it's a clash of cultures of how nations express pride and pain. And that makes this conflict not only louder, but harder to solve. Section 7, America's role with Japan, but still watching. The United States says one thing: we support Japan's defense. But when asked who owns the Senkaku Islands, suddenly, it gets quiet. Why? America has a security treaty with Japan. It promises to protect Japan if attacked. That includes the Senkaku Islands. At least, that's what they say. But when reporters ask, do you recognize Japan's sovereignty over the islands? U.S. officials dodge the question. They say, we take no position on sovereignty. Support without full support. Why the hesitation? Because America wants balance. It needs Japan as an ally. But it doesn't want to anger China too much. So it walks a tightrope. One hand on Japan's shoulder, the other hand in China's pocket. In diplomacy, this is called strategic ambiguity. It means keeping things vague so you have room to move later. But ambiguity comes at a cost. If conflict erupts, will America truly act? Will it defend Japan, or back off to avoid war? Ask yourself this: if your friend said, "I've got your back," but refused to say your name, would you trust them? That's the situation Japan is in. America watches the storm. It builds bases in Okinawa. It sends ships through the East China Sea. But when it comes to taking sides, it always leaves the door open. That silence? It speaks volumes. Section 8, if China takes the islands, what happens next? Let's imagine the unthinkable. China moves in. It plants a flag. It builds a base. And the world watches shocked, but unsure what to do. What would happen next? Would Japan respond militarily? Would the U.S. be forced to join the fight? Would Asia descend into war over a few rocks? Maybe, maybe not. But one thing is certain. If China succeeds once, it might try again. Because this isn't just about the Senkaku Islands. There are other disputed territories. The South China Sea, Taiwan, parts of the Himalayas. Each time China pushes and no one pushes back, it learns a lesson. That power can go unchallenged. And that's what worries many around the world. But let's go deeper. Why would China risk so much for uninhabited islands? Is it really about territory? Or is it about testing the system? Testing America's resolve? Testing Japan's patience? Sometimes, taking land isn't about land at all. It's about showing strength, about controlling the narrative, about sending a message not just to enemies, but to your own people. So here's the big question. If this is not about rocks, then what is it really about? And if we can't answer that, we might not be ready for what comes next. Section 9, the real reason: power, pride, and public emotion. Let's be honest. This is not just about rocks. It never was. At the center of this dispute is pride. For China, the Senkaku Islands are not just territory. They are part of a larger story. A story of national recovery, of rising from past humiliation, of standing strong against foreign control. Losing that narrative would be painful. Admitting defeat would shake the image China has built, not just abroad, but at home. For Japan, the issue is different. It's about law, about consistency, about not letting emotional politics rewrite history. Japan doesn't want to shout, but it refuses to step back. So this becomes more than diplomacy. It becomes a battle of stories. Who controls the narrative? Who looks stronger to their people? Who walks away looking proud? That's why compromise is so hard. Because giving in means losing face. And in East Asia, losing face can be worse than losing land. It's not just about politics. It's about identity and emotion. Ask yourself this: in your own country, Have you ever seen people defend something not because they need it, but because they can't lose it? That's the power of pride. And when pride drives policy, even empty rocks can become a battlefield. Section 10 Conclusion: Why the world should pay attention now. They look like nothing. Small, far away, silent. But the Senkaku Islands carry more weight than they seem. Because this isn't just a story about Japan and China. It's a test, a signal, a warning, a test of how the world responds to quiet aggression, a signal of how pride can overtake reason, and a warning of how even tiny sparks can ignite something bigger. If we ignore it, we might miss the pattern. The creeping shifts in global power, the normalization of pressure and provocation, the silence that allows boldness to grow. What's happening here isn't isolated. It's connected to every other border, every other sea, every other place where emotion and ambition collide. So yes, these islands are small, but the forces behind them are enormous. This is about more than land. It's about rules, about balance, and about who gets to decide what happens next. Ask yourself this: if a dispute over uninhabited rocks can shake Asia, what does that say about the world we're building? Sometimes, the biggest lessons come from the smallest places. And sometimes, the places that seem empty are actually full of meaning. We understand this topic may spark strong reactions. But this video does not aim to blame, insult, or provoke anyone. It simply reflects Japan's position quietly and clearly. And if it starts a conversation, maybe that's not such a bad thing. Cultural habits like this may seem small, but they reflect big ideas. How does your culture compare? Let's share and learn from each other. Leave a comment if you'd like. And please like and subscribe for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.